Welcome to the final module. This is going to begin our lecture on labor mobility. So it's going to be chapter 8 in your textbook. I'm going to skip some of the immigration from other countries, the sections on that, and focus on internal migration within the US. Um, I think this internal migration merits discussion, not just because of its importance for, the health of a functioning labor market, but also because people tend to have the exact opposite perception of reality. So what do you think the trend has been for people moving between states? Do you think it's higher or lower than it's been historically? I've heard from a lot of people in just, regular conversations that people move now more than ever before. We are more connected between states, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, interstate mobility has fallen since we started tracking in World War II. So it's been a steady decline. And right before the pandemic, it reached its lowest level ever. Now, some of this can be intuitive. I moved from West Virginia to West Virginia from PA 3 years ago. And while I already had my job secured, so that was one less thing to worry about, it was still really a hassle to move. And, you know, it shouldn't be too surprising that people don't like to move. So we're going to look at when workers are willing to move from one state to another. So the ability for workers to move from one local labor market to another local labor market without any restrictions on that is fundamental to the idea of an efficiently functioning labor market. This idea dates back to Adam Smith in 1776 and his idea of the invisible hand. And it's one way in which our invisible hand in the labor market operates. And we talked about this in a previous chapter when we have workers in two markets, A and B. In market B, wages are really low. Market A, wages are really high. People will move from market B to market A, and it kind of equalizes the wages between those two labor markets. Milton Friedman also talks about this idea at length. Many people, when they think of Milton Friedman, they think of his political work. He had that show on TV, Free to Choose. You talk about tax policy or the military draft. But Friedman won the Nobel Prize, and he came up with a number of ideas used by economists of every sort of background and every school of thought. He wrote in a lot of different areas. One, I'm talking just about, the differences in local labor markets and moving between them and how that's important for a well-functioning labor market. So we're going to talk a little bit about this here, about why migration is so important from an economic standpoint. So firms in one region may have difficulty filling open positions. Without workers to fill those positions, consumers end up suffering either long wait times, inconvenient services, or higher prices. Something that my colleagues at the Knee Center work on is healthcare access, because there are a lot of areas without enough physicians or even without enough APRNs or RNs in order for patients to receive the care that they need. So one solution to a lack of healthcare providers is to encourage or at least minimize the barriers to those healthcare providers moving into these areas where they don't have enough. Make it easy for people to move. So you go from having, maybe there's a surplus in the city and there's none out in the countryside, where you have more people moving out or healthcare providers moving out to rural areas so the patients have access to healthcare. We see this all throughout the labor market as well, where firms in one location won't have enough workers nearby that have the skills that they need. And you can have other places where you have a lot of workers in an area, too many, some of them being employed or underemployed, working jobs that don't fully match their skills and training. So if they can move to the area of the shortage of professionals, where firms need to hire more workers, both the worker and the consumers in that area and the firm that they'd be hired by will all be made better off, economically speaking. So it's good for everyone. Of course, workers may want to stay near their family and friends, or they may want to stay put for any number of reasons, even if they can't find a job or if they're underemployed. So in this chapter, in this lecture, and the following lecture, I'm going to talk about migration from an economic standpoint, and we're going to consider the costs and benefits from an economic standpoint. Now, I've never moved more than 4 hours away from my parents and grandparents, and I really don't intend to. So in my personal life, I'm not maximizing GDP. I'm not trying, like, seeking to maximize economic efficiency or anything like that. I recognize that there's more to life, and we're going to generally talk about costs, but part of the cost is all these things from your personal life, all these additional hardships or awkward things or difficulties of moving, that these are going to enter in on the cost side. But our models are going to be simplified just so you can see how these variables interact. Now, if a destination has better economic prospects, people are more likely to move there. Now, moving can be a hassle. So the gains in wages not only have to exceed their current possibilities in their current location. So it's not just that the wage in the new home and the destination is, $1 per year greater than the wage that they're currently earning in their current location. It also has to exceed all the direct costs of moving and even all the indirect costs of living somewhere else. Now, I've done some work on the effect of occupational licensing laws on interstate migration because these are state level laws. When you move from one state to another, you don't automatically have that license. It's not as simple as transferring a driver's license. So there's this barrier to entry, this added cost of maybe the time and the hassle and even the money of applying for a new license. But there's a bunch of other costs besides these monetary costs that I talk about. So finding the new restaurants that you like, making friends, dealing with new traffic patterns in the city, new schools for your kids, them finding new friends. These are all burdens that people face for moving, even if we're not quantifying them into a simple, a dollar figure to compare. These are still real costs that we're facing. So if I'm going to move, the money and the job have to be good, or these hassles have to be minimized. And usually both. I need to make more money, but the amount of money I make has to exceed all of those hassles I'm going to face from moving. In general, people are going to consider these costs of moving with the potential benefits. So people will hesitate to move to Cambria County, Pennsylvania, where things aren't exactly booming, but they're more likely to move to a place like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Morgantown, where things are better and where they have, they're more likely to want to move there, to actually live there. The cost of moving from their current location is lower because they will enjoy living there more. Now, my cousin moved to France with his wife and their son a few years ago. I think it was supposed to be temporary at the time, but the pandemic hit a few months after they moved, and it suddenly became permanent. Now, she's from France. She grew up there. Her parents live there, and they live near her parents in the south of France. So not a bad deal if you ask me. Before they moved there, Tom knew some French from being married to a native French speaker, and he'd been there several times for holidays with her family, and her parents had come here a few times to see them. So he knew some people there too. And French culture is different from the US, definitely, but it's still Western. There's still a lot we have in common. So it's not that different in the grand scheme of things. He started working remotely for his job and then began working for a French university over there. So when people are considering move to a new place, they think about a lot. Of course, they think about money, but there are a lot of other costs to consider. So moving to a new country is more difficult than moving to a new state. So you're going over, they may speak an entirely different language. You're going distance-wise very far from where you live. Besides the language, totally different jobs, different culture. There's a lot of different things you have to deal with, and all these costs add up. So my cousin had a relatively easy move compared to most international moves. With different languages, cultures, long distances, these things can be extremely costly. And hopefully by now, from this class, you realize that when costs increase, it decreases the likelihood of doing something. So in this case, when moving becomes more costly or more difficult, it decreases the likelihood of moving. So intuitively, people think to themselves, will my job, will my career prospects be better in this new place? And how difficult will it be to move there? Both of those sides are considerations, the costs and the benefits. Even if you're not sitting down and writing out like a little cost benefit analysis thing or a pro and cons list, you're still thinking about both of these things, these potential benefits and these potential costs. Now, this should be a familiar refrain for you by now in this course. I keep repeating this over and over again. These are some of the simple tools of economics that we apply time and time again. Now, more educated workers are more likely to move. Jobs that require greater human capital are more likely to have difficulty filling positions because fewer people can do these jobs, and opportunities for training and experience may be limited in the surrounding area. Plus, these jobs pay more, so people with those careers are more likely to move for them. Again, it can be costly to move, so you need even higher salaries, like an even bigger difference from your current job if you're going to move, especially if it turns out to be a far move. Now, a long time ago, people with low education used to move quite a bit too, and this was to find opportunity. But that was slightly different. Think of stories like The Grapes of Wrath, of people leaving the Dust Bowl and heading west in hopes of finding something. Today, fewer people do that with just hopes of getting somewhere and, okay, now I'm going to find a job. Typically, it's trying to get a job lined up before you move. People will move for the job more often than they will say, hey, I want to go to the city, and then look for a job once they get there. Now, young people are also more likely to move to a new state. So think for a second, why might this be the case? These are kind of things you don't need economic theory to tell you why a young person might not want to do this. When you're young, you're often single, or even if you aren't single, you don't have kids yet, or at least they're not in school. So in many cases, you haven't built up a community yet, and your job isn't as high paying. So in general, it's just less costly to pick up and move to opportunity. So here's the economic theory, the very basic one. Again, we're considering costs and the benefits. When the cost is lower when you're younger, moves become more attractive. So you're more likely to move. And that's what we see is the younger people are more likely to move. People that are in their mid 20s, their early 30s, they're a, a higher percentage of them are willing to move. You see on this figure here, compared to people as they get older, look at them in their 50s and their 60s, down to 1% from almost 4% in their mid 20s.